What if a single voice could shake the foundations of injustice? What if one dream could confront centuries of hatred? What if courage, fueled by faith, could transform an entire nation? This is not just history. This is the story of a man who dared to believe that love was stronger than fear. His name was Martin Luther King Jr., and his dream changed the world. Martin Luther King Jr. was born into a world already divided by injustice. In the American South, racial segregation was not just law, it was daily life. Separate schools, separate buses, separate churches, separate futures. Discrimination was normal, inequality was defended, and fear ruled the streets. From an early age, Martin witnessed this cruelty firsthand. He saw his father stand with dignity in the face of racism. He watched his family endure humiliation and rejection. And deep within his heart, a question took root. Is this really the world God intended? Gifted with intelligence, discipline, and deep spiritual sensitivity, Martin entered college at just 15 years old. But knowledge alone could not satisfy him. His mind searched for truth, and his soul longed for justice. As he immersed himself in scripture, theology, and philosophy, one conviction became unshakable: that faith without action is empty. That the gospel was not only about salvation after death, but transformation in life. That love, when lived courageously, could confront even the deepest hatred. Inspired by Jesus Christ and the principles of nonviolent resistance, Martin began shaping a vision that would define his life. To challenge injustice, not with violence, not with revenge, but with love. A love bold enough to expose cruelty, a love strong enough to awaken conscience, a love powerful enough to change history. But choosing this path meant choosing suffering, threats, arrests, violence, constant danger. Yet knowing the cost, he still said yes, yes to sacrifice, yes to obedience, yes to a calling that would place him directly in the path of hatred. Because Martin Luther King Jr. believed that silence was more dangerous than fear, and that injustice, left unchallenged, would destroy the soul of a nation. Soon his voice would echo across America. Soon his dream would ignite a movement. Soon history would never be the same. But first, he would be tested. Before we continue, if stories of faith, courage, and transformation inspire you, stay with us. Subscribe now and become part of a global community that shares powerful stories of hope and purpose. Leave your like. It helps this message reach more hearts around the world. And share this video, because someone you know may desperately need this story today. Every story you watch keeps these testimonies alive. Every like pushes this mission forward, and every share spreads light into darkness. Together, we are telling stories that change lives. In 1955, a single moment would ignite a movement. A tired seamstress named Rosa Parks boarded a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When ordered to give up her seat to a white passenger, she refused. That quiet act of courage shook the foundations of segregation. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the black community, and a decision was made. The people would no longer comply. They would walk. For 381 days, tens of thousands of African Americans refused to ride the buses. They walked to work. They walked to school. They walked through rain, heat, exhaustion, and fear. And at the center of this movement stood a young, unknown pastor, Martin Luther King Jr. At just 26 years old, Martin was chosen to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. Overnight, he became the voice of a people and the target of powerful enemies. Threats flooded in. Hate letters filled his mailbox. Phone calls promised death. And yet, he stood firm. From crowded churches to packed streets, Martin preached a revolutionary message: not revenge, not violence, but love. He called the people to resist injustice without becoming unjust themselves, to confront hatred without becoming hateful, to fight oppression without losing their souls. Night after night, Martin returned home not knowing if he would live to see morning. One evening, as fear crushed his spirit, he bowed in prayer and cried out to God. And in that moment of surrender, he felt a divine assurance: stand up for righteousness, stand up for truth, and God will be with you. From that night forward, fear no longer ruled his heart. As the boycott dragged on, pressure intensified. Martin was arrested. His home was bombed while his wife and infant daughter were inside. Miraculously, they survived. Anger exploded among the crowd. Some demanded retaliation. But Martin stood before them and raised his voice. "Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do not let hate drive out hate. Only love can do that." In that moment, his leadership transformed fury into discipline, and discipline into unstoppable momentum. The world began to watch. Newspapers carried his words. Television broadcast his face. His sermons echoed across America. After more than a year of sacrifice, the Supreme Court ruled segregation on buses unconstitutional. The boycott had won. But for Martin, this was only the beginning. Because the victory in Montgomery revealed something powerful. That peaceful resistance, rooted in faith, could shatter even the strongest chains of injustice. And now a movement was rising, a movement that would soon sweep across the nation. The movement was no longer confined to a single city. It was spreading like wildfire across the nation. Sit-ins erupted at segregated lunch counters. Marches filled city streets. Churches became centers of resistance. Songs of hope echoed through fear-filled neighborhoods, and everywhere one name began to rise above all others: Martin Luther King, Jr. His voice, once heard only by small congregations, now carried across states, across borders, and across oceans. But with every step forward, the resistance grew more violent. Police batons swung mercilessly. Attack dogs were unleashed on unarmed crowds. Fire hoses tore through peaceful protesters. Prison cells filled with those who dared to stand, and the cameras captured it all. For the first time in history, the brutality of segregation was broadcast directly into the living rooms of millions. The world could no longer look away. In 1963, the movement reached one of its most dangerous battlegrounds, Birmingham, Alabama. Known as one of the most segregated and violent cities in America, Birmingham had become a fortress of racial hatred. Bombings, beatings, and lynchings were common. Fear controlled daily life. Martin knew the risk, but he also knew that confronting Birmingham meant confronting the very heart of segregation. So he went. With him came thousands of ordinary men, women, and children, armed with nothing but courage, prayer, and faith. Day after day they marched, and day after day violence answered them. Police released dogs trained to attack. Fire hoses powerful enough to strip bark from trees were turned on children. Protesters were thrown into overcrowded jail cells. The images shocked the conscience of the world. Never before had injustice looked so undeniable. Never before had cruelty been so clearly exposed. During one of these demonstrations, Martin himself was arrested and thrown into a cold, isolated cell. There, in darkness and silence, he reflected deeply. Critics accused him of moving too fast. Religious leaders urged patience. Political leaders demanded compromise. But from that jail cell, Martin wrote words that would forever define moral courage. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He explained that waiting had too often meant never, that peace without justice was not peace at all, that true faith demanded action. Those words became a declaration to the world, a reminder that moral responsibility cannot be postponed. And his letter, smuggled out piece by piece, spread across the nation, igniting conviction in millions of hearts. As pressure mounted, a bold idea emerged, a massive march, not in the South, but in the very heart of the nation, Washington, D.C., on August 28, 1963, more than 250 Zuldren people flooded the National Mall, standing before the Lincoln Memorial, black and white, young and old, believers and skeptics. Workers, students, clergy, and families, they came not for revenge, they came for dignity, they came for justice, they came for hope. Never before had such a diverse crowd gathered in unity for a single cause. The air was electric. History held its breath. When Martin stepped forward, silence fell across the massive crowd. His heart pounded, his hands trembled, yet deep within him burned an unshakable conviction. And then his voice rose. I have a dream that one day children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A dream of freedom, a dream of equality, a dream of brotherhood. With each sentence, the crowd erupted in tears, applause, and hope. His words were not political slogans. They were echoes of scripture. They were cries for moral awakening. They were a declaration that God's justice belongs to all people. And in that moment, the soul of a nation was stirred. The speech traveled instantly across the globe. Newspapers printed it, radios broadcast it, televisions replayed it, and generations would remember it. It became one of the greatest speeches in human history. But while the world celebrated, danger multiplied. Death threats arrived daily. Hate groups plotted in secret. Government agencies monitored his every move. Extremists demanded his silence. Still, Martin refused to retreat. He traveled relentlessly, city to city, state to state, nation to nation, preaching reconciliation, justice, and peace. He spoke not only of racial equality, but of economic justice, poverty, war, and human dignity. His message grew broader, his mission grew heavier, and his burden grew deeper. Behind closed doors, exhaustion overtook him. Fear whispered, loneliness pressed in. Yet every time he stood to speak, strength returned, because Martin knew something eternal, that this was not merely a political struggle, it was a spiritual battle, a battle for the conscience of humanity. A battle between hatred and love, between fear and faith, between darkness and light. And though his body grew weary, his spirit refused to surrender. The closer justice came, the closer danger followed, the brighter his light shone. The darker the shadows became. History was moving, destiny was unfolding, and Martin Luther King Jr. was walking straight into it. By the late 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. stood at the height of global influence. His voice shaped laws, his words shifted cultures, his presence moved nations. But behind the applause, the burden was crushing. The deeper Martin pressed into justice, the more complex his mission became. Victory in civil rights had opened new battles against poverty, inequality, and war. And those battles would prove even more dangerous. Martin began to speak boldly against economic injustice. He saw entire communities trapped in cycles of poverty, denied opportunity, dignity, and hope. He believed true equality could not exist without economic fairness, so he launched what would become known as the Poor People's Campaign. Its goal was radical: to unite the poor of all races, Black, white, Latino, and Native American, in a massive movement for economic justice. This vision challenged not only racial systems, but economic power itself, and that made powerful enemies. At the same time, Martin took a public stand against the Vietnam War. He declared that war was draining resources from the poor and corrupting the moral soul of America. Many supporters turned away. Political allies withdrew. Media outlets criticized him. Even fellow civil rights leaders warned him to stay silent. But Martin refused. He believed that silence in the face of injustice was betrayal. His words became sharper, his message became heavier, and the pressure on his life intensified. Exhaustion overtook him. Travel blurred into endless nights. Hotels replaced homes. Crowds replaced rest. Death threats arrived daily. Sleep became shallow. Yet still he went. Still he preached. Still he marched. because deep in his heart, Martin knew his time was limited. In early 1968, he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to support sanitation workers who were striking for dignity and fair wages. These men worked in brutal conditions. They were underpaid. They were disrespected. They were treated as disposable. Martin saw their struggle as a reflection of everything he fought against. So once again, he stepped into danger. Tension filled the streets. Anger simmered. Violence threatened to erupt. During one march, chaos broke out. Windows shattered. Police clashed with protesters. The movement stood on the edge of losing its moral foundation. Martin was devastated. He feared that decades of nonviolent discipline could unravel in a single moment. So he returned to Memphis, determined to lead one final march, one that would restore peace, purpose, and moral clarity. On the night of April 3, 1968, exhausted and battling illness, Martin hesitated to attend a scheduled meeting. But something within urged him to go. And that night, standing before a weary crowd, he delivered one of the most haunting speeches of his life. "I've been to the mountaintop," he said. He spoke of seeing the promised land. He spoke of uncertainty. He spoke of fear. And then, with calm surrender, he declared, "I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." Those words fell heavy upon the room. Many sensed it. Something had shifted. It was as if Martin himself knew his journey was nearing its end. That night, he rested. The next day, destiny awaited. April 4th, 1968. The sun slowly faded over Memphis, Tennessee. In a modest motel balcony, Martin Luther King Jr. stood, speaking casually with friends. For a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, and then, in an instant, history shattered. A single shot echoed through the evening air. The dreamer fell. The nation froze. The world wept. News spread like wildfire. Cities erupted in grief. Crowds filled the streets in silence. Church bells rang. Candles were lit. Tears flowed across every border. The voice that had called for love was silenced by hatred. The man who preached peace was taken by violence. And yet, his message could not be killed. Riots broke out. Anger surged. Pain overwhelmed reason. But even in death, Martin's teachings continued to speak. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. His words became anchors in the storm. His dream became a compass for the broken. In the days that followed, millions reflected. What kind of world would rise from this tragedy? Would fear win? Would hatred triumph? Or would love rise stronger than ever? Slowly, quietly, courage answered, laws changed, barriers fell, doors opened. And though the journey was far from complete, the path forward had been carved by sacrifice. Today, decades later, his voice still echoes. In classrooms, in churches, in marches, in quiet prayers, in hearts longing for justice. Martin Luther King Jr. did not live to see the fullness of his dream, but because he dared to believe, millions now walk closer to it. His life reminds us that one voice can awaken a nation, that one dream can reshape history, that one soul, surrendered to truth, can change the world. And now that dream lives on, through us, through our courage, through our compassion, through our refusal to accept injustice, through our decision to love, even when hatred seems louder, because the dream never belonged to one man, it belongs to humanity. Before we close, if stories of faith, courage, and transformation inspire you, stay with us. Subscribe now and become part of a global community that shares powerful stories of hope and purpose. Leave your like. It helps this message reach more hearts around the world. And share this video, because someone you know may desperately need this story today. Every story you watch keeps these testimonies alive. Every like pushes this mission forward. and every share spreads light into darkness. Together, we are telling stories that change lives. And now we want to hear from you. Which story should we tell next? Leave your suggestions in the comments. Your idea could become our next video.